I didn't cry when my grandfather died. I cried when I read what he left me. The funeral was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it presses. We stood in a half-circle around his urn, surrounded by lilies and a faint scent of cedarwood that always lingered in the hallway of their Spokane home. I remember looking at the flowers and thinking, he would have hated lilies. They reminded him of hospitals. Aunt Carla dabbed her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Uncle Gerald looked like he wanted to say something but never did. My grandmother, Vera, sat straight-backed with her hands folded in her lap, face unreadable. My mother, Meredith, wore the black wool coat she always brought to funerals and pretended to be holding up just fine. She smiled softly at neighbors, nodded politely to distant cousins. Not once did she look at me. Afterward, people peeled off quickly. Funerals on cold Washington mornings don't lend themselves to lingering. I stayed back, standing near the rose bush by the porch, the one Grandpa used to trim every Sunday morning like clockwork. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just grew too far away from it. I hadn't even made it back to Seattle when the call came in. My phone lit up with Andrea T., law office. I answered on instinct, thinking maybe something had been left in probate that needed clarification. Andrea's voice was steady and dry, like always. Hi, Lena, I know this might be a little soon, but your grandfather's personal letter arrived at my office this morning. Personal letter? I asked, still half watching the pine trees slide past the passenger window. Yes, not part of the will we filed formally, but he wrote something privately for you, along with documents. You might want to sit down. I was already sitting. What did he say? There was a pause. Lena, he left you his Lake Chelan property, the house, and the investment account tied to it. The balance is over $700,000. The world didn't spin. It just stopped. I must have said nothing for a full 30 seconds because Andrea repeated gently, Lena. I don't understand, I finally whispered. Why me? Why not Meredith? Andrea hesitated, and I could almost hear her shifting papers on her desk. He added a line. It's not legal language, but it's clear. Lena saw me. She never asked, but she saw me. I want her to live free. Let her go. By the time I reached home, I had stared at the cream-colored envelope so long it had lost all meaning. It was real, his signature, the tone in his words, the scent of his pen. He wrote about the lake, the mornings we spent skimming stones, the cherry pie Grandma burned one summer. Memories I'd filed away like dry leaves suddenly caught fire. But the line that shook me the most was simple. Don't let them twist this. You earned your peace. I didn't know who them was, but I had guesses. The next day, Meredith knocked on my apartment door. She didn't ask if she could come in, she just stepped over the threshold, like she had every right to. She had brought cookies. Store-bought. Chocolate chip, the kind I never liked. I heard about the will, she said, eyes flat. I assumed everything would be divided equally. I told Carla the same. It wasn't. She sat, smoothing the front of her gray pantsuit. Dad made a lot of mistakes. Emotionally. Financially. But I don't think he meant to exclude the rest of the family. We were planning to use that house. Mom, I cut in, soft but sharp. It wasn't a mistake. He sent me the letter himself. Something changed in her expression. For just a second, I saw the flicker of something raw, resentment, fear, something more ancient than both. But it vanished just as quickly. She leaned forward and gave me a hug I wasn't ready for. I didn't lift my arms. As she pulled away, her lips brushed my ear. This is your father's fault, she whispered. And then she left. That night, I reread the letter. Every crease, every comma. I tried to imagine what it felt like for him to write this alone, knowing it would stir a storm. He didn't just leave me money. He left me a choice. And whatever silence I'd grown used to in this family was about to get loud. The next morning, I found a text from my mother waiting on my phone. "We need to talk. There are things you don't understand about him." And beneath it, a new message popped in just as I sat down with my coffee. Friday dinner. Family gathering. Can't miss. No explanation. No please. Just an order. And, just like that, it started. When I pulled into my mother's driveway, the curtains in the front window fluttered as if someone had just stepped back from watching me. The porch lights were already on, even though the sun hadn't quite dipped below the pines yet. There was something overly prepared about the house tonight, like it knew a performance was about to begin. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rosemary and something roasted. My mother's voice drifted from the kitchen, too loud and too cheerful. "She's here," she called out, as if I were a guest she barely knew. I walked in to see her laying out Grandma Vera's china, the floral pattern plates reserved only for Christmas or funerals. The same plates we didn't use when Grandpa died. "Oh, honey," she said, air kissing my cheek. "You look thin. Are you eating well?" I gave a half smile and stepped aside before she could wrap her arms around me. The living room had been rearranged, new throw pillows, a vase of fresh lilies on the mantel, and the big mahogany coffee table cleared, except for one neatly stacked folder. My gaze caught a glint of pearls, the necklace that had gone missing after Grandma's stroke, now snug around my mother's neck like it had never left her possession. "Big night?" I asked, nodding toward the place settings. "We thought a little family dinner would be good," she said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "You know, heal some of the tension." I stepped into the dining room and froze. 3 unfamiliar faces sat at the table, sipping white wine as if they'd been there for years. "This is Michael, Dennis, and Sylvia," Meredith said lightly. "They're family friends." Michael stood first, extending his hand like he expected me to curtsy. "Lena, right? We've heard so much about you." I took his hand out of politeness, but my grip was cold. Sylvia gave a warm, practiced smile. "We're counselors. Family transitions, estate planning. That sort of thing." "Sounds convenient," I said, sliding into the seat farthest from them. Grandma Vera was already seated, looking smaller than usual, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't meet my eyes. Dinner passed like a play I hadn't been cast in. Every question had layers about my job, my apartment, my boyfriend. "Still freelancing?" asked Dennis, spooning potatoes like we were old pals. "That must leave a lot of free time." Aunt Carla and Uncle Gerald chimed in, all syrupy encouragement and half suggestions. "You could get something more grounded. Maybe in Spokane," said Carla. I noticed my mother watching me between bites, her smile never quite touching her eyes. It was the same smile she used to give grocery clerks she didn't trust. After dessert, store-bought tiramisu dressed up on Vera's cake stand, Sylvia cleared her throat and reached for the folder. "We brought this," she said, her voice gentle. "It's just a simple power of attorney." I stared at the envelope. "For what?" "Just to help manage the assets. Make sure everything's streamlined, tax-wise," she replied, pushing it across the table. I didn't touch it. "My lawyer hasn't mentioned any issues." "Oh, well, it's nothing binding," Meredith interjected too quickly. "Just something to have in place. In case." "In case of what?" Silence stretched. Grandma Vera dropped her spoon. I looked around the table and every eye turned away but one. My mother's. She leaned forward, voice velvet smooth. We're family, honey. Who's going to protect you if not me? The folder sat like a trap between us. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. The lights in the living room were dimmed, just low enough to soften the edges of discomfort. Someone had turned on the gas fireplace, even though it wasn't particularly cold. The folder sat open now, like a blooming flower whose petals were full of legal jargon and unintended consequences. I flipped through the documents slowly. Thick pages. Long paragraphs. Sentences that looped around themselves like vines. Joint stewardship. Emergency proxy. Fiduciary deference. It was the kind of language meant to feel important, yet remain unreadable. I'd seen enough NDAs and licensing contracts in my freelance days to know when I was being snowed. Sylvia's voice was smooth, reassuring. It's all pretty standard, Lena. A way to protect the estate. Avoid conflict down the road. Michael chimed in. No need to get bogged down in the technical stuff. We're just ensuring continuity. I looked up. Continuity of what? Of trust, my mother said, sitting next to me now. We're a family, not a business negotiation. But it felt like a negotiation, one I hadn't agreed to enter. Aunt Carla and Uncle Gerald stayed quiet, sipping their coffee too loudly. Grandma Vera said nothing, her teacup trembling ever so slightly in her hand. Dennis leaned forward. You know, with large inheritances, there are liabilities. Taxes. Claims. Unwanted attention. Having a central decision-maker avoids litigation. Who's the central decision-maker? I asked, though I already knew. Sylvia tapped a paragraph with a manicured nail. Meredith would act as your financial proxy in matters exceeding $50,000, only until an oversight period concludes. It's a formality. That word, formality, struck something in me. It was the same one my dad had used when he took his name off the house deed before the divorce. Just a formality, he'd said. And then we lost the house. I turned to a clause labeled financial incapacity. There, buried in legalese, was a line noting my limited personal financial experience and recommending trusted guardianship. I could feel my jaw tighten. Did you write this? I asked Meredith, holding the page up. She didn't flinch. I helped shape it, yes. I know you're sincere, honey. I know you want to do the right thing. But let's be honest, you've never handled large sums of money. It's not your fault. It's just reality. And this is your solution? Take control and call it protection. She sighed, like she pitied me. You're overthinking this. Sylvia gently pushed a pen toward me. You don't need to understand every detail. We hired the best people. You're in good hands. I stared at the pen like it was a dagger sheathed in plastic. I'd like to call my lawyer, I said, standing up. The room stilled. Right now, I added, pulling out my phone. There was a bead of silence, thick, loaded. Sylvia's face remained politely blank. Carla looked away. Gerald fumbled with his phone like he suddenly had somewhere to be. Then Meredith stood, her hands on her hips, lips pinched into a smile that didn't reach anything in her face. Do you doubt me? She asked, voice low but sharp as a needle. Her eyes locked on mine. Not sad, not hurt, just offended. Like I had ruined the ending to a play she had spent months writing. The pen was still on the table. I didn't touch it. No one said a word when I tapped Andrea's name on my phone screen. No one reached for the pen on the table. No one asked me to wait. But no one got up either. Silence settled in like fog, quiet, heavy, all-encompassing. Andrea answered on the second ring. Lena? Everything okay? Her voice was warm, alert. I put her on speaker and looked around the room before speaking. Hi, Andrea. I have some documents in front of me. They say they're meant to help manage the inheritance. Could you take a quick listen? I heard someone suck in a breath, maybe Aunt Carla. But no one interrupted. I began reading the text of the joint financial agreement, the one Sylvia had called a formality. Andrea interrupted after the second paragraph. Lena, stop right there. That clause implies permanent fiduciary authority granted to the listed secondary party, Meredith in this case, unless explicitly revoked under litigation. That's not a formality. That's control. Meredith's hands stayed folded on her lap. Still no one spoke. I scanned down the page and read aloud the line that had made my skin crawl earlier. Should the inheritor be deemed financially inexperienced, supervisory power may be extended indefinitely in matters of liquid assets, including all joint or individual property derived from the estate. Andrea spoke again, slower this time. That's a lifetime financial guardianship, Lena. No court would call that casual. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the ceiling fan. Then Grandma Vera stirred in her chair, her fingers trembling as she reached for her teacup. Her voice was frail but sharp. Is this true, Meredith? Meredith didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked straight at Vera. Her smile faded just slightly, then returned, cooler now. It's not about what's written. It's about what's intended. I glanced around the room. Sylvia shifted in her seat. Carla was fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Uncle Gerald looked like he might sink into the floor. I reached into my purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, slightly wrinkled at the corners. The same kind my grandfather used to mail us birthday cards every year. The kind he'd sealed with a simple wax stamp. I brought this too, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Inside was a bank statement. Not mine. Not the estate's. My mother's. I had Andrea pull public financial records. I wanted to be sure. I slid the paper across the table. It confirms multiple sales of family heirlooms, antiques, jewelry, some before Grandpa's passing, and withdrawals from a shared family account without consent. Meredith's face froze. Not in guilt. In calculation. She wasn't flustered, just cornered. She slowly picked up the paper, gave it a glance, and then set it down like it had dirt on it. I did what was necessary to keep us afloat, she said quietly. Your grandfather knew. But did Grandma know? I asked, looking at Vera. The room thickened again. No one moved. Then, Michael, the so-called financial advisor, stood up. He didn't say much. Just quietly packed up his papers, clipped his briefcase shut, and walked toward the door. I will not continue to participate in this, he said flatly. The door clicked behind him, and the silence that followed didn't feel like fog anymore. It felt like collapse. No one said goodbye when I left. Not my mother, not Carla, not Gerald. Even Vera had gone quiet, her eyes glued to the untouched napkin on her lap. The hallway was still warm from dinner, but the mood had chilled to something brittle. I shut the door behind me, half expecting someone to call out, to follow, but the house stayed silent. That kind of silence isn't empty. It rings. I didn't look back as I pulled away, headlights slicing across the hydrangeas and gravel drive. My hands were tight on the wheel. My breath sat shallow in my chest, like it knew too much. It was almost midnight when I crossed the city limits out of Spokane. The highway stretched ahead, long and dark, dotted with occasional trucks and convenience store lights in the distance. I kept the radio off. No music could speak to the knot in my stomach anyway. Somewhere near Moses Lake, I remembered something. A phrase my mother used to say, again and again, when I was younger, usually when I asked for space or disagreed with her about the smallest things. Live for me, Lena. I gave you everything. All I ask is that you live for me. At the time, I thought it was love. Now it felt more like a leash. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. Andrea. I tapped to answer, putting her on speaker. Hey, I said, my voice hoarse. You okay? No. She was quiet a moment. You stood firm. That's what your grandfather would have wanted most. Not the money, the principle. I blinked fast, keeping my eyes on the road. I don't feel strong. I feel like I just set fire to what little family I had left. Andrea exhaled. Sometimes the only way to survive a burning house is to walk out. I didn't respond, but I let that sentence sit with me for miles. By the time I reached Seattle, dawn had begun smudging the sky with pale blue and pink. I parked outside my apartment building, climbed the stairs with jelly legs, and barely managed to set my keys down before collapsing on the couch. I slept for 2 hours, maybe less. When I woke up, there was a knock at my door. Amy stood there, wearing sweats and holding 2 coffees. She didn't ask for an explanation. Just handed me a cup and curled up on the far end of the couch like we were back in college. Spill, she said. And I did. From the china plates to the folder, the fake warmth, the pen, the silence, the exit. Amy listened, nodding quietly. When I finished, she asked, "How many times has your mom cried in front of you after doing something manipulative?" I blinked. I don't know, a lot. She uses tears like armor to keep herself from facing the mess she made. That's harsh, I said. But it didn't sound wrong. I'm not saying she doesn't feel pain, Amy added. But she's learned to weaponize it. That's the difference. I sat there for a moment, staring at the rim of my coffee cup. Then my phone buzzed again. A new email. Subject line, "Family is hurting." I hesitated before opening it. Lena, I know things got out of hand. The family is hurting, and I know you are too. I want to make this right. Let's meet again, with Grandma present this time. We can talk. We're still family. Please come back for one more dinner. I stared at the screen and felt the hook behind every word. When someone shows you who they are, do you believe them? Or do you wait until the damage is beyond repair? It was a question I kept circling all week, like a loose tooth I couldn't stop poking. Amy didn't sugarcoat it. I've forgiven her 3 times. Are you sure this time's different? We were sitting at our usual lunch spot near my office downtown, poking at kale bowls we weren't really eating. I appreciated Amy's directness more than I cared to admit. There was no pity in her tone, no false comfort. Just reality. Straight up. I don't know if I'm going back to forgive her, I said. I think I'm going back to see what happens when she doesn't get what she wants. Amy raised an eyebrow. That's risky. I nodded. So I'm going prepared. Back at my desk that afternoon, I found Andrea's email waiting. The subject line read, Potential asset coercion, draft response. She'd written up a formal cease and desist letter in case anyone tried to push another agreement in front of me. The language was firm, professional, but the part that caught me was in the note she attached. If you go, bring this. But also bring something for you. Proof. Memory. A record. Your words matter more than theirs. That night, I stopped by a small electronics store and picked up a pocket-sized voice recorder. Not because I wanted drama, but because I didn't trust that memory would be enough. Not anymore. A few days later, another message landed in my inbox. This one from Aunt Carla. It was short. Everyone saw what happened. Gerald and we didn't know what she planned. Meredith still says it was taken out of context. I'm sorry. I hope you'll come. That word, hope, sat heavy in my chest. What exactly were they hoping for? A reset? An erasure? Later that evening, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw Uncle Gerald's name. But curiosity won. His voice was cautious. Lena. I wanted to call myself. Carla's email probably sounded too vague. I stayed quiet. I didn't agree with what Meredith did, he continued. But she's my sister. And when she gets defensive, she doubles down. You know that. I waited. There was always a but. She's been crying nonstop since you left. She thinks she lost you. Maybe if she had more time. Time wouldn't have changed what she signed, I interrupted. There was a pause. I'm just asking you to come, that's all. Talk. Let Grandma be there. It might keep things calmer. That word again. Might. I ended the call politely. But my stomach twisted for hours. I didn't decide right away. I let the week unfold, days of work that didn't feel focused, nights that left me mentally pacing. But by Friday morning, I packed a bag. Not the usual clothes for comfort kind of bag. This time, I packed with intent. I folded the cease and desist letter into a file folder. I slipped the recorder into my coat pocket. And I left the homemade carrot cake I usually brought for family dinners right where it was, in the fridge, untouched. No more sweeteners. No more distractions. Just me, my truth, and whatever version of theirs would show up this time. As the car crested the familiar hill and my mother's house came into view, my fingers tightened around the recorder in my pocket. It was small, cold, and oddly comforting. Like a second spine, the porch light was already on. Same house. Same roses. Same wind chimes humming on the left. But this time, I wasn't here to make peace. I was here to bear witness. No china this time. No roast beef. Just a glass pitcher of tap water sweating on the table and the hum of the air conditioner clicking on and off in the corner. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. Everyone was already there when I walked in. My mother sat at the far end of the couch, her hands folded in her lap like a school teacher waiting to begin class. Aunt Carla and Uncle Gerald sat side by side, closer to the door than to her. And then there was Grandma Vera, in the armchair by the window, holding her cane across her lap like it was a sword. No one moved. No one said hello. I took the empty chair near the coffee table and placed my folder, Andrea's folder, right in the center of it. Meredith smiled, but it didn't reach past her lips. I'm glad you came, she said. I thought, maybe we could start over. Start over how? I asked. My voice was steady, but my throat tightened with every word. I mean, she said, gesturing around the room vaguely, family is complicated. Emotions get ahead of us. Let's just put all this behind us. What matters is that we're together. But not sorry, I said, more to myself than anyone else. Carla shifted, but didn't speak. Gerald stared at his shoes. Then Grandma Vera stirred. For the first time since my grandfather's funeral, she looked me square in the face. I brought these, she said, reaching into her handbag. She pulled out a slim envelope, opened it with slow fingers, and slid several creased papers across the coffee table. I didn't have to ask what they were. I recognized the names and item codes before she said it aloud. Pawnshop receipts, Vera said. 3 of them. For items I never gave away. She looked at Meredith next. The pearl necklace. The silverware set. The locket from 1947. All sold before your father passed. All traced back to your bank account. Meredith didn't deny it. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Then Carla leaned forward and placed something small on the table. A brooch, silver, with a deep green stone at its center. It used to be mine. My grandfather gave it to me on my 13th birthday. I hadn't seen it in years. I found it at Lincoln's Jewelry and Loan, she said quietly. I bought it back last week. I looked at her, surprised. I didn't know, she said. Not until that night. The air conditioner clicked again, a rhythmic buzz that filled the space between the words we weren't brave enough to say. I opened the folder and pulled out the documents Andrea had prepared. I didn't read them aloud. I didn't need to. I brought these, I said. It's a formal statement. I'm disclaiming any future financial obligation to this family. I'm keeping what was legally given to me, but I am not responsible for anyone else's expectations, debts, or regrets. I laid them on the table, next to the receipts, the brooch, the sweating pitcher of water. You can sign them, I said. Or not. It's up to you. But either way, I'm done being a tool in someone else's plan. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything I'd said before. Meredith's expression didn't change, not right away. But then her hands curled slightly, fingers pressing into her palms. Her lips tightened, not like she was about to cry, but like she was holding back something bitter. She leaned forward, looked directly into my eyes. If you put pen to paper to end this, she said, voice sharp as glass, I will no longer be your mother. The room went still. Even the air conditioner stopped. I sat perfectly still, the recorder in my coat pocket suddenly warm against my thigh. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. Some words deserve to echo. Freedom isn't free. It comes with pain, doubt, and long stretches of silence that no one prepares you for. It's been 2 days since I placed those documents on the table. No one signed. No one tore them up either. Meredith just stood, gave me that line about not being my mother anymore, and left the room without another word. I didn't follow her. And maybe that was the first real act of freedom I'd ever taken. Grandma Vera called me the next morning. You okay, honey? She asked, her voice sounding older than usual. I think so, I said. But also, I don't know what okay looks like anymore. She sighed. Sometimes it just means you're not pretending anymore. Andrea and I debriefed by phone that afternoon. I told her everything. Meredith's threat, the unsigned papers, the emotional fallout still clinging to the walls of my grandmother's house. She didn't object? Andrea asked. No, I said. But she didn't acknowledge them either. That's its own kind of answer, Andrea replied. 3 days later, she vanished. I don't mean in the literal sense. Not at first. Meredith didn't disappear off the face of the earth. But her social media accounts went dark. No new posts. Profile pictures gone. Friends texted me asking if she was all right because they hadn't heard from her. By the end of the week, the for sale sign was up in her front yard. Uncle Gerald called me late one night, his voice thick with something between concern and fatigue. She's leaving, he said. Didn't tell Carla until yesterday. She says she needs space. Says she's tired of being misunderstood. I didn't answer. Maybe, he added after a pause, she needs to really hit rock bottom to wake up. I didn't say anything to that either. Because I wasn't sure I believed people always woke up just because they hit bottom. Sometimes they just kept digging. I drove past her house on a slow Saturday morning. The curtains were already down, the windows bare. The porch looked emptier than I remembered, even the wind chimes were gone. It felt like watching a ghost evacuate her own story. Amy came over that afternoon. We sat on my small balcony, drinking weak tea and listening to traffic pass below. She'll be back, she said. People like her always circle back when they want something. What if she doesn't? I asked. Amy shrugged. Then that's her choice. doesn't have to change yours. Later that evening, after Amy left, I found the package. It was resting on my front doormat. No return address. No stamp. Just brown paper wrapped with a thin cord and a single line of handwriting on top. For when you need to remember something really important. I froze. I knew that handwriting. It was my grandfather's. Inside was his old leather-bound journal. I thought it had been lost years ago, maybe sold off with the other heirlooms or tossed in one of Meredith's fits of spring cleaning. I opened it slowly, afraid it might fall apart in my hands. On the inside cover, he had written in thick, looping ink, "Lena, you don't get to choose your blood, but you do get to choose your boundary. Freedom is not doing what you want, but refusing what hurts you." My breath caught. He'd written it just for me. I ran my fingers over the words like they were braille, like they might vanish if I didn't commit them to memory. I didn't know where Meredith had gone or if she'd ever come back. But I knew where I stood now, and that, somehow, felt like enough. My phone stopped ringing. No voicemails, no emails, no vague family updates disguised as guilt trips. No Meredith. That should have felt like peace. But it didn't. The silence left too much space. It crept in like fog, soft, formless, impossible to push back. I woke each morning feeling like something was missing, only to remember that I'd asked for exactly this. At work, I went through the motions. I clicked through spreadsheets, replied to emails, smiled when needed. But my mind didn't anchor to anything. It drifted, constantly circling that last moment at my mother's house, the way she said, "I will no longer be your mother," like she was handing in a resignation letter I didn't ask for. Sometimes I replayed it in my head with different endings. She signs the papers. She apologizes. She hugs me. She doesn't leave. But none of those versions existed outside my imagination. One afternoon, Amy dropped by my cubicle, holding 2 smoothies and wearing that look she gets when she's trying to rescue me from myself. "Yoga tonight?" she asked. "It's the quiet kind, just breathing and stretching. You could use it." I gave her a tired smile. "Thanks, but I think I'll just stay home." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" I nodded. "Yeah, just need some alone time." She didn't push. She never does. That's why I trust her. Back at my apartment, I opened my grandfather's journal again. I'd read the first few pages over and over, but now I let myself go deeper. The ink had faded in spots, and some of the pages were dog-eared, like he'd revisited them often. On one page, written in his familiar slanted hand, he had underlined a sentence twice. "What we suffer must not stop with us. Turn pain into teaching, or it just becomes a cage." I read it 3 times. Then I closed the book and stared at the ceiling. Was I just sitting in the cage? The thought followed me around all week. It whispered in the back of my head as I waited for the kettle to boil, as I folded laundry, as I stood in the elevator at work, pretending not to feel hollow. I stopped checking my mother's Facebook. I stopped wondering where she had gone. If she wanted space, she could have all the space in the world. But I couldn't let her actions define the rest of my story. I pulled out the journal again and flipped to the end, where he'd scrawled notes about budgeting, interest rates, credit scams. Half of it was stuff I already knew from my job, but the other half, it was the tone, the care. He wrote like he wanted someone to be safe. I remembered how he once helped a teenager at the church open her first savings account. He took an entire Saturday just to walk her through the basics. He didn't just give advice, he gave time. My time wasn't being used for much these days. That night, I opened my laptop. I typed into the search bar without really knowing what I was looking for. community finance workshops, volunteering. The results loaded slowly, my internet dragging, as if even my browser was cautious about this new direction. But something clicked. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information yet. I didn't have a plan. Just a feeling that maybe I could do something with all this pain besides letting it sit in my chest. Maybe I could teach what I'd learned the hard way. Maybe I could make it mean something. I never thought I'd stand in front of strangers, teaching them how to say no. Not after everything I let happen. Not after every yes I gave just to keep the peace, or keep the love, or at least delay the next disappointment. But there I was, holding a dry erase marker in a fluorescent-lit room at the Greenview Community Center in Seattle, facing a half-circle of folding chairs filled with women who looked like they had also been told one too many times that boundaries were selfish. It was the second Saturday of the month. My name was on the laminated poster near the door, Lena Harper, Personal Finance and Boundary Basics. It still felt strange to read it in print, like I was borrowing someone else's confidence. My voice cracked during my introduction. I dropped the whiteboard eraser. I forgot the example I'd practiced 3 times the night before. But no one left. There were 6 women in the room. A retired nurse named Janine. A single mom named Alicia who spoke with a soft accent and carried a notebook already half filled with scribbles. A woman in her 50s named Carolyn who hadn't smiled once, but kept nodding. The others, too, sat with the kind of stillness that told me they weren't here for fluff. I took a breath. I started again. We covered budgeting, saying no to co-signing loans, how to check credit reports. I told a story about how I once lent my entire birthday savings to someone who never paid me back, leaving out that the someone was my mother and I was 16. They nodded, took notes. Some chuckled when I said, "You can't rebuild your future on someone else's overdue apology." Then it came. Alicia raised her hand slowly. What if the person who keeps asking is your biological mother? The words thudded against my chest like a dropped book. I froze. I didn't know how to answer. I looked at her, and for a second, I saw myself just younger or maybe older, depending on the day. I'm still figuring that out, I finally said. But I think it starts with believing you're allowed to say no, even to someone who gave you life. The room went quiet, but no one looked away. After the session ended, the women began gathering their things. A few came up to thank me, quick nods, light touches on the arm. Then Carolyn approached. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a narrow velvet box. Inside was a thin silver bracelet, tarnished at the edges, but still beautiful. "I was going to sell this last month," she said. "But after today, I think you need it more than I do." My eyes widened. "I can't accept that." She shook her head gently. "It's not payment. It's solidarity." I took it with both hands. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the bracelet lying beside my teacup, as Andrea's name lit up my phone. The message was short. "Heads up. Someone just filed a complaint with the county regarding the Chelan property. I'll dig into it, but it's probably Meredith." I didn't react at first. Then I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Of course. I should have known the silence wouldn't last forever. You can disappear physically, but your shadow stays behind. Meredith hadn't been seen in over 2 months. No calls. No texts. Her social media had gone silent. Her old house was sold, and every trace of her in Spokane felt like smoke that had already dissipated. But here she was again, sitting in a folder on Andrea's desk. "She filed this last week," Andrea said, flipping open the beige court document with a sigh. "Claiming you coerced her into relinquishing her right to the Chelan property." I stared at the printed words. They felt more absurd than threatening, but they still hit somewhere deep. She wasn't even part of the will. Andrea nodded. Legally speaking, no. But emotionally? She's building a narrative. Look here, she writes. My daughter pressured me into signing financial waivers under emotional duress. I almost laughed. She never signed anything. Exactly, Andrea said. Which makes this whole thing more of a ploy than a case. But even ploys can cause real damage. The hearing was scheduled quickly, one of those preliminary motions that, if not addressed, could snowball into weeks of court entanglements. I flew to Spokane on a Thursday, heart heavy, stomach clenched. Walking into that courthouse felt like stepping into a play where everyone knew their lines, but I didn't have a script. Carla met me in the hallway. Her lipstick was smudged from nerves, but her spine was straight. I brought the audio file, she whispered, holding up a flash drive like it was a secret weapon. The second family meeting, where Meredith threatened to disown you if you didn't back down. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. The judge, an older woman with a sharp gray bob and an even sharper tone, called us in. Meredith, of course, wasn't present. Just her attorney, reading from the affidavit she'd filed from whatever undisclosed location she now called home. I was manipulated by my daughter during a time of grief, the lawyer read. She leveraged emotional instability and withheld access to family property. Andrea stood, expression unreadable. Your Honor, not only was my client the sole heir named in the will, but the plaintiff was never designated to receive the Chelan property. Furthermore, we have a recording, made with all parties' knowledge, that demonstrates quite the opposite of coercion. She nodded at Carla, who plugged in the drive. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. It was surreal hearing Meredith's voice in that setting. If you put pen to paper to end this, I will no longer be your mother. There was a sharp silence after the clip ended. Carla cleared her throat and said, she said that in front of me, my husband, and her own mother. No one forced her into anything. She tried to control Lena. That's all this is. Andrea followed quickly. We argue this is a continuation of Meredith's pattern, emotional manipulation by proxy. Now she's trying to use the legal system as her next stage. The judge looked down at the file, then back up. Has the plaintiff made any attempt to appear in person? No, Your Honor, the opposing counsel admitted. She is currently out of state for health reasons. I see. The judge removed her glasses slowly. This court requires direct testimony to proceed on a claim this serious. Until the plaintiff appears in person, this case is suspended. A gavel knock later, it was over. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. In the hallway, Carla hugged me tightly. You're stronger than you think. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I felt strong or just tired of being dragged through storm after storm. Back at the house, I sat in the living room next to Grandma Vera. The old carpet smelled faintly of cedar and age. Outside, dusk was curling around the edges of the window. She was quiet for a long while. Then, softly, she said, Your mother is back. I turned. She's in town again, Grandma said. Gerald saw her, said she looked thin, different. The silence between us thickened. Just because a storm ends doesn't mean it's over. She looked thinner, and for the first time, less certain. I spotted her through the coffee shop window before I stepped in. Her back was to me, hunched slightly, like a woman bracing against a wind no one else could feel. The Meredith I used to know wouldn't be caught dead in sneakers, much less an oversized coat with one button missing. But there she was. No makeup. No jewelry. her hands wrapped around a plain white mug like it was a lifeline. I walked in slowly, nodding once to the legal observer who sat a few tables away, a quiet presence required by the court. He gave a discreet nod, then returned to his laptop. She didn't rise to greet me, just looked up with eyes that flickered briefly with recognition, and then with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe nothing. I slid into the seat across from her. "You look well," she said, voice hoarse like it hadn't been used much lately. "You don't," I replied, not unkindly. She half smiled, then looked down into her cup. "I deserve that." We sat in silence, the sound of milk steaming in the background, a few forks clinking ceramic. The world continued casually around us, like this wasn't the first time a daughter stared across a table at the woman who had once raised her and nearly destroyed her. "I didn't come here to argue," she said finally. "The court insisted on mediation. And maybe that's for the best." I nodded. "Did you come for the money? Or me?" The question fell between us like a stone in shallow water. No ripples. Just a small, heavy splash. She looked up sharply, then slowly exhaled. "I'm not sure," she said. "Maybe both. Maybe neither." "That's not an answer," I said. "It's the only honest one I have." We paused again. I looked at her, really looked. The lines around her mouth were deeper, her eyes more shadowed. There was something about her posture that spoke of exhaustion, not just physical, but spiritual. Like someone who had been walking for too long and realized she'd been headed the wrong way. "I made mistakes," she admitted. "Many. Some of them I told myself were for your sake. Some I just made because I didn't know how not to." I waited. "I thought if I could control things, protect you, I'd be a good mother. But control isn't the same as love. And protection doesn't mean much when it hurts the one you're trying to protect." I swallowed hard. That was closer to an apology than anything I'd heard in years. Still, it wasn't enough. "I needed you to be honest back then," I said. "To be safe." And I wasn't. She nodded. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she whispered. "Just understanding. Even a little." "That's not something you ask for over coffee," I said, eyes narrowing slightly. "That's something you earn over time." She reached into her coat pocket and slid a small envelope across the table. "I brought something." I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was an old photograph, creased at the corners, faded. It was us. I was maybe 5. She was holding my hand, smiling at something off camera. I barely remembered the moment. On the back, written in her cursive, barely legible, were the words, "If I could do it all over again, I would have lived differently." I looked up at her. For once, she didn't say anything more. No justifications. No dramatic gestures. Just silence. And somehow, that silence spoke more truth than all her past words combined. Some bridges don't burn. They just fall apart piece by piece until all that's left is a gap you learn to walk around. I stood on the deck of the Lake Chelan house with a cup of black tea warming my hands. The late spring breeze carried the scent of pine and distant boat gas, 2 smells I never knew I missed until I came back. It wasn't a vacation. It was something quieter, like giving myself permission to breathe without explanation. Andrea had once told me, not all people are bad, but some people are not strong enough to change. I used to hate that sentence. It felt like a loophole, an excuse. But lately, I'd begun to see its sadness more than its blame. Some people don't mean to hurt you. They just don't know how not to. My phone buzzed once, an email. From Meredith. It only said, "Mom is learning to live without demands." That was it. No questions. No guilt. No attempt to twist the knife. Just a fragile signal from someone learning the alphabet of humility. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I opened a fresh Word document and began writing. Not to her. Not yet. To myself and to women like me. I started chronicling what it had felt like to be gaslit by the person who used to braid my hair. What it meant to set boundaries so late in life, you could still feel the roots of the old ones tugging. How it didn't feel like victory, but relief. The next day, I told Amy over lunch. "You want to start a blog?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You, the one who used to delete her Facebook comments because they sounded too opinionated?" I smirked. That was the old me. This is the boundary-setting, inheritance-defending version. She leaned in. Then let's make it count. Within the week, we launched the Boundaries Project. Amy built the site simple, clean, with a soft blue header and space for others to share their own stories. I uploaded the first 3 essays and recorded a voice introduction. My voice wavered at first, but steadied by the second paragraph. Andrea sent me a message that night. "You're not just surviving this. You're translating it." Vera mailed me a handwritten letter, her cursive looping delicately across thick cream paper. "Thank you for protecting your grandfather's gift. Not the money, but the clarity." It had been a long time since anyone called me brave without sarcasm. Still, even with the healing, there were shadows. Some days, I caught myself composing messages to my mother in my head. And other days, I tore them up before they made it out of my thoughts. One afternoon, while proofreading a post called "Guilt is Not Love," a comment came in. Just one sentence. "You just saved me from losing all my scholarship money. Thanks for speaking up." I stared at it for a long while. The username was unfamiliar, but the feeling it gave me wasn't. Maybe this was what the other side of trauma looked like. Not complete joy. Not closure tied up with a bow. Just the soft rustling of growth in places where rot used to be. I closed my laptop slowly and looked out at the lake. Some bridges fall apart. But if you're careful, if you build gently, somewhere down the line, maybe you find another way across. The lake house wasn't just mine. It was finally mine in peace. Spring had arrived at Chelan in its gentlest form. The kind of breeze that didn't push, just invited. Morning light glinted off the water like shattered glass and danced across the hardwood floor I'd just finished polishing. The old boards didn't creak the same way anymore. Not since I'd replaced the weak ones near the kitchen where Grandpa used to stand in his slippers, muttering over interest rates and grocery receipts. That was the first thing I rehung, his picture. I found the frame tucked in a box, labeled linens, as if someone had wanted to hide it among the soft things. He was younger in this photo than I remembered him. Stern, but proud. I hammered the nail in gently, right above the fireplace. When I stepped back, it felt right. Like he was watching, not guarding, just witnessing. I didn't plan to turn the house into anything formal. But I also didn't want it to just be mine. This space had weathered enough secrets. It deserved stories, now shared ones. That's how the idea came to me. Community classes. Nothing grand. Just folding chairs, a chalkboard, and people willing to learn. The first session was on a Tuesday morning. Amy arrived early with muffins and too much caffeine in her system. "It smells like hope in here," she said, taking in the lemon polish and fresh white curtains. We arranged chairs in a half circle. 5 women arrived, some familiar from the center, a couple new. One was a single mom who didn't know how to say no to her ex asking for money just until Friday. Another had just moved from Idaho after divorcing a man who handled everything except her happiness. I started with a simple sentence, written in dry erase marker. Saying no is a skill, not a rudeness. There was a pause, the kind I used to fear when teaching. But not anymore. I had learned silence didn't mean failure, it meant people were thinking. I was raised to believe saying no was selfish, one woman said. Even to people who didn't deserve a yes. We nodded together, like a choir of tired women, harmonizing in hard-earned agreement. We went over basic budgeting. How to recognize financial manipulation masked as love. We practiced how to respond when someone says, "You'd do this if you really cared." And at the end, when they left, I saw them walking taller. Not fixed, but firmer. Later that afternoon, Grandma Vera arrived with a lemon pie in one hand and arthritis gloves on both. "This place is warmer than I remember," she said. Or maybe I'm just more open to the warmth now. We drank tea on the back deck, the same spot where Grandpa once explained compounding interest using a garden hose and a leaky bucket. I told her about the class, about the blog, about how I'd finally stopped needing Meredith's approval. She smiled, eyes wet. "You're the best part of our family, Lena. You just forgot it for a while." That night, as I was tidying the kitchen, a small, cream-colored envelope peeked out from between the mail pile. The handwriting made me stop breathing for half a beat. Meredith. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. No email. No call. Nothing since that single line about learning to live without demands. I opened it with careful fingers. "You didn't come. But you read everything I wrote. That's more than I deserved. Thank you for keeping the best part of our family." Even if that part wasn't me, there was no return address. No plea. Just ink on paper as raw and restrained as she'd always been. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer marked important, and closed it softly. The lake house was quiet again. But this time it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like freedom. Inheritance isn't just money. It's the story we decide to carry forward. The morning sun slid across the windows of the Chelan conference hall like a quiet promise. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly. Amy stood by the welcome table, checking name tags. Andrea sipped weak hotel coffee and paced near the AV setup. I had been up since dawn, too steady to be nervous, too focused to second guess. It was the first full-day community event I'd ever hosted. We titled it Freedom Through Boundaries, and to my surprise, local radio picked it up and ran a small story. A few local journalists RSVP'd. Someone even brought their daughter along to hear what it means to not be nice all the time. I walked to the front slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel every step. This wasn't just a class. It was something more, a choice to live differently. "Good morning," I began. "You know me as Lena. I used to believe legacy was something other people gave you. But today, I believe it's what you choose to pass forward." A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A younger man near the aisle nodded slowly. I breathed in. I used to think I had to earn my family's love by giving everything, my money, my time, my voice. But love that demands sacrifice without respect isn't love. It's silence dressed up in obligation. The room was still. I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm here because I want peace. And not everyone in your story will apologize. Not everyone will change. That's not your fault. That's their journey. I let the pause sit for a moment. What I've learned is this: not everyone needs forgiveness to move on. But I do for myself. Because carrying hate is just another version of debt. That line stuck. I could see it land, people leaning in, heads tilting slightly as if to catch it one more time in their minds. Later, when I stepped down, the applause wasn't loud. It was long, gentle, like a tide that doesn't need to crash to be powerful. Andrea clasped my shoulder. "You've just rewritten your inheritance." Amy whispered, "You made them feel safe." That's a legacy right there. The local paper asked for a quote, so I gave them the same one I closed with during the session. We don't owe people access just because they share our blood. But we do owe ourselves the right to say, "This ends with me." That afternoon, we walked down to the lake. Not for a speech, just to breathe. A few of the attendees joined. We skipped stones. Someone played guitar. A little boy ran into the water with his socks on and laughed like he'd never been told no. The wind off the lake was cool, but not bitter. I stayed after everyone left. Let the quiet fold over me. Grandpa once told me peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of clarity. I think this was what he meant. Later, when I returned home, my inbox had ballooned with messages, congrats, press inquiries, strangers thanking me for saying what we're all afraid to admit. I scrolled past most of them. Then I saw it. Subject line, "I saw your video." Sender, Meredith Crawford. I clicked. I watched the entire thing. Twice. I didn't know you had that much to say. I didn't know I'd made it that hard for you to speak. I am very proud today, but I will not ask for anything more. I know you need space. I just wanted you to know I see you now. I didn't cry. Not this time. I closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, and made a cup of chamomile tea. I stood at the window while it steeped, watching the lake turn gold under the falling sun. There was nothing I needed from her anymore. But I was grateful she finally listened. I drew the line. I never moved it. But I also never stopped loving from the side. The air smelled like turning leaves and damp earth. Autumn had come to Chelan, not the loud, fiery kind, but the soft version. Gold dust in the wind, chilled mornings, the sound of dry grass whispering against the porch railings. I stood near the edge of the garden with a watering can, tilting its narrow spout toward the base of the clove tree Grandpa planted decades ago. It hadn't grown much in the last year, but it had held its own through frost, summer sun, and wind. I understood that kind of survival. Tucked under my arm was a letter. Not one I'd received. One I'd written. I took a few steps to the base of the tree, where the soil was loose from recent weeding. With a small trowel, I dug a shallow space and placed the envelope inside. I didn't wrap it in plastic. I didn't need it preserved. The words were never meant to last. Just to be said. Dear Mom, I heard you, even when you weren't speaking kindly. I loved you, even when I didn't like who I became around you. I forgive you, even though I still hurt. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not stepping back inside the maze. I'm free, and I'm staying free. Love, Lena. I patted the earth down and sat beside the clove tree, cross-legged on the flattened grass. There was no cathartic release. No cinematic tears. Just a quiet sense of stillness, as if the ground beneath me acknowledged what I had done and agreed it was time. Amy showed up later with marshmallow brownies from Vera. Your grandma's idea of emotional support is sugar, she laughed, setting the tin on the porch swing. Smart woman. She looked at the tree, then at the dirt smudged on my palms. Is it done? I wiped my hands on my jeans. As done as it needs to be. She hesitated. What if she really changed? I thought about that. I had thought about it before. She might have, I said, standing and brushing grass off my legs. But at least Mom doesn't change me anymore. Amy smiled, more from the eyes than the mouth. That's a solid place to live from. That evening, I took out a small wooden sign I'd been working on for weeks. It wasn't fancy, just sanded pine with hand-painted words. I hung it on the front door of the lake house, just under the old brass knocker. This house doesn't require anyone to be perfect. Just be sincere enough. It creaked slightly in the breeze. I hoped it would age gracefully, weathered, but readable. Like me. Inside, I lit one of Grandpa's old oil lamps, even though the electricity worked fine. Some things feel truer in a softer glow. I opened his diary again, flipping past the dog-eared pages until I found the one that anchored me months ago. You can't fix people, but you can fix how you react. He was right. I had spent years trying to twist myself into a shape that wouldn't upset Meredith, that might finally be enough to earn softness. In the end, the only thing I truly needed to do was stop twisting. I didn't need to be cruel. I just needed to be clear. That night, as I lay in bed with the window cracked open and the scent of cloves drifting in, I wasn't waiting for the phone to buzz. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I wasn't expecting anything from her. And that was the peace I had earned. Hello there. I'm the one who's quietly walked this entire journey with you, from the moment Lena opened that unexpected letter to the final afternoon she stood by the lake house, finally free. This story wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about learning when to draw the line and finding the strength to keep it. About realizing that even love, when it comes with manipulation or silence, can wound us in invisible ways. But also about how healing is still possible, even if it doesn't arrive wrapped in reconciliation. What touched me the most wasn't the drama or the legal twists, but Lena's quiet bravery. Her choice to live truthfully, to stop chasing approval, and to redefine family not by blood, but by sincerity. And you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved, just to love yourself a little more? Have you ever drawn a line that hurt, but saved you? If this story reminded you of something deep inside, leave a comment with the number 1, or just share where you're watching from. I'd love to know where this story has reached. And if you enjoy stories that speak gently but powerfully to the heart, stories about real people and real feelings, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. Thank you, truly, for staying with me through all 16 chapters. Your presence, your time, your empathy, it matters. Until we meet again in the next story, take care of your peace. And never forget, you have the right to choose the legacy you carry forward.